I'm Anjali Pathak and I'm going to show you how to make a favourite of mine, which are ginger biscuits. They're super easy and they are delicious. So the first thing I've done is I've turned my oven on to 180 because that needs to get hot to bake the cookies. And now I'm going to mix my dry ingredients together. So I'm going to start with plain flour. I prefer plain flour, but you could of course use wholemeal flour if you prefer. And I've got a sieve in my bowl and I need to make sure that I weigh it just because it's baking. So with baking you can switch up your recipes a little bit, but if you're new to baking then it's best really to stick to the recipe and then you can experiment. So I'm trying to get to a stage where I'm at 190, and if you sieve it as you go, you'll get a gist. And you want to make sure it goes all the way through the sieve. Now I sieved it with the sieve in the bowl, so I'm making sure that I take that weight into account as well. That's about 190 degrees. Now if you have the luxury of having self-raising flour, then you will not need to add the next ingredient I'm going to add, which is my baking powder. So this is what's going to give a little lightness to the cookies, but it's also going to make sure that my baking powder helps them rise a little bit so they're not too flat. So I'm going to go in with a teaspoon and a half of that. And then I'm also needing to go in with some baking soda. So you wouldn't want to use baking soda on its own, and you're going to use less than of the baking powder, and that's just 1 teaspoon. And now we need to think about those flavours. So we're thinking ginger biscuits. So most importantly, we're going in with ginger. So I've got about a tablespoon of ginger powder. You could go in with fresh grated ginger if you wanted. I prefer the powder because I find it goes into the cookies more and it gives a really nice even flavour. And then I'm going to go in with a little bit of cinnamon, one of my favourite spices. That's just about a teaspoon's worth of it. Give that a sieve in. Make sure you get all the bits out of the sieve. And then we want to make sure that we mix it all up. And you can smell all of that ginger, you can smell all of that cinnamon. And of course, if you love other spices, go in with other spices. Nutmeg, cloves, green cardamom, all work really well, especially for the festive season. Spices are amazing in this recipe. And then to give it that sweetness, that ultimate sweetness, the one that we're looking for, I need to go in with 85 grams of brown sugar. Now you notice I'm not sieving this in because it won't go through the grates in the sieve. So 85 grams of that. Give it a stir in, and now this is the messy bit. This is the bit that makes you feel like you're baking. I'm going to have to get in there with my hands and rub in my butter. So I've got 100 grams of butter here, which I have just cubed, and that's going to make it easier for me to rub it in, and I've softened it a little bit by bringing it to room temperature. So all of that can go in. So all the butter's in there, and now this is the fun bit. So I started baking when I was really young and when I was in the kitchen, and coming from England where cookies and biscuits are always loved and perfect with a cup of English tea, and this is something that I used to bake when I was a child. And it's very common in England to have these type of ginger biscuits. So since I've moved to India, it's something that I want to make sure that I don't do without. So what I'm looking for here is waiting for it to resemble breadcrumbs. So it doesn't take very long. Try and make sure every little bit of flour has a little bit of butter with it, and that means the butter's going to melt evenly and you'll have the same shape, size cookies. So we're waiting to get to that breadcrumb stage. Nearly there. Perfect. Now I've obviously got a lot stuck on my fingers. Make sure you get all of that off before you give your hands a wash. And then to make these really gooey, we're going to go in with our golden syrup. That's going to make it really lovely and extra sweet and quite gooey as a mixture. So I'm going to give my hands a wash and I'll be right back. So now we're ready to go in with our golden syrup. So we're going to go in with 75 grams. So I love these squeezy bottles because it means you can manage how much you're putting in, otherwise it goes absolutely everywhere. Great. And then we need to give it a really good stir just to incorporate it. And you'll see it'll start to come together. So it looks like it's not going to come together at all at this stage. It looks like there's not enough moisture in there, but trust me, it will definitely come together. This has to be one of the best cookies you can ever make, one of the best biscuits to make if you're starting out with baking, because it is really that simple and you get perfect results every time. So when it looks like you can't do any more with your spoon, time to get your hands in there. I'm very much a person that likes to cook with my hands if I can. So it's really important to use all your senses when you're cooking. Obviously smell those spices, feel those cookies before they're formed, just to make sure you've got the right texture. And you'll see now it starts to come together as I'm using my hands. And we're trying to get it into one big shape, a dough ball of some sort, before we're ready to form the cookies. And make sure that you've really found all those little bits of flour so that it's all coated in that mixture. And when it's gotten to a point where it can hold its own shape, which it has now, and you can test a little bit, grab it in your hand. If you can form a shape all on its own without it crumbling too much, then it's ready for you to actually make your cookies. So I've lined my baking tray with parchment paper. That's just going to make sure that the cookies don't stick. And I need to get about a tablespoon's worth, gives a really good size. Now of course you can make them really large, you can make them really small. Make sure you form it into a ball into your hand. Give it a roll around in your hand to get a nice round shape, and then flatten it a little bit. Flatten it a little bit more when it's in there, and you'll see slight cracks as you go. Now that gives this traditional ginger nut look, this ginger biscuit look. So not essential to get that, so if you don't have time, you just got to get them on the tray and get them in the oven. Don't worry about it. Now this mixture should make about 16 or so cookies, again depending on what size. If you do these sizes, about a tablespoon's worth, it'll get about 16. A little bit of a press. So I've managed to get about 9 on my tray. I'm going to save the rest of my mixture. I'll pop that in the fridge and I'll bake them another time. What I really love to see is these little cracks on the outside. That is exactly like the store-bought ones that I used to have as a child, which gave me the excitement and inspiration to want to go home and bake them myself. So now, just to give it a little extra touch, which make them look and taste quite nice, and give them a little bit of a crumb on top, is to sprinkle a little bit more of that brown sugar just on top of the cookies just before I bake them. So the same brown sugar I used earlier, just a little bit on each one, not much. Now these are ready to go in the oven. It's been heating up, 180 degrees, so all it needs is about 10 to 15 minutes in that oven. So it's been 10 minutes, time to check them out. Perfect. These look incredible. Just like when I was young, you can see all these cracks. These are the cracks that I really wanted to make sure that I captured, which is where the golden syrup really helps with all of this. So they're actually going to be too soft. If you lift them off now, you can see they're starting to bend a little. Just leave them on the tray for about 5 minutes just to set their shape, and then I'm ready to cool them properly on a wire rack. So these are totally ready. I am so ready to have a bite of these. If you like what you see, make sure you tune into my other videos. They're going to be a one-on-one baking. So make sure you share it with all your friends who love to bake. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. And if you have any comments on what you'd like to see next time, then make sure you let me know.